Y'all know what time it is. It is the In the Scope podcast with your boy Joshua M Hicks, senior writer for War Media. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram at Josh M Hicks Media, and follow War Media. We are Regal Radio all over YouTube, War Media, all podcast platforms, War on Anchor, RealRegalRadio.com, War Media on Instagram and Twitter as well. You name it. We got all this. We got all the good takes and the good hot takes for your Chicago and culture news. And obviously, this is Chicago, so we got to talk about the Chicago Bulls as well as a little bit of the NBA stuff that's going on, taking place right now. And I got one of the best guys to talk about all those things, especially the insights for the Chicago Bulls. He is a writer for NBC Sports Chicago. I got to everybody give it up for my guy, Rob Schaefer. Rob, how you doing, man?
I'm good, Josh. No complaints. It's a beautiful day in Chicago. The Bulls season wrapped up a couple days ago. Unfortunately, they're not where they want to be, but the job keeps going. It's going to be a busy off season. So, blessed to be here. Blessed to still be watching good basketball. The Bulls might not be playing anymore, but the play-in games have lived up to the hype so far, at least in my opinion, and it should be a good postseason ahead. So, not much in particular to object to right now for me.
I hear you, man. I hear you. And I'm glad to have you back on my show to talk about all of those things. And we're going to just jump right into the actual play-in tournament. The NBA, I have to admit, I gotta give them their props for this one. I gotta clap my hands for this one because they had some pretty interesting play-in games that worked out in their favor, especially the most recent one with LeBron James and the Lakers versus Steph Curry and the Warriors. They said that was probably the highest rated television rated game since the 2019 Western Conference Finals, which is pretty serious comparing that, from that point leading up to now, you had the pandemic, you had TV rates going down all over the place with all the other sports being played. And sports world in general is trying to get back to the swing of things. So for that to work out for the NBA in the league's favor, man, that's big time. And I enjoyed it. What has been your thoughts as far as watching all those playing games within this playing tournament so far?
Yeah, I never understood the criticism of it, to be honest. I mean, I get it if you're a player or an owner or a coach on a team that maybe didn't envision themselves being in the play-in tournament, like if you're a LeBron James on the Lakers or, the Mavericks didn't end up in it, but Mark Cuban came out and was critical of it when it looked like they might fall to the 7th seed. So I get that, but from the fan, consumer, media member perspective, like, I don't know. I think it achieved its goal of keeping teams more engaged down the stretch of the season. Like you just saw at the end of the regular season, sure, there was some tanking and there were some resting guys. Like that last Bulls game, for example, was a lot of guys that were at the end of the rotation for the whole season getting their first opportunity. So there was a little bit of that, but for the most part, I thought they did a good job of keeping games high stakes for as long as they possibly could, which I'm sure drives interest. They did a good job of, enough teams thought that they were in the race enough so that you saw teams like making aggressive moves. I think the Bulls fall in that category. Like, do the Bulls swing the Nikola Vucevic trade if the play-in doesn't kind of expand their window for contention? I don't know, but they certainly did, and obviously they fall short. But it's still, I think the NBA likes it when teams, especially big market teams, are making, pushing the chips win now moves. And then the product itself, I mean, yeah, you mentioned the ratings on that Lakers Warriors game, which I think lived up to every ounce of the hype. I think I read somewhere that the Celtics Wizards game from the night before was one of the higher rated games of the season too. So obviously they're getting the results they want in that department. It's other than that Pacers Hornets game, which was the first one to this point, it's been pretty high level basketball so far. So there's just nothing for me to really quibble with. I don't see why it can't be something that the league adopts moving forward, just from an interest standpoint. And to me, like, I don't know, people bring up the quality of or the competitive balance issue. To me, if you're a 7 or 8 seed in your conference, like I don't really have a problem with you needing to, pass one more level to get into the postseason. Historically, that those seeds just are not, factors in the ultimate title race. This year's a little bit different, and that's why I think some criticism maybe this year is a little justified because, I don't know, the Lakers are favored against the Suns. I might pick them to win that series. So this year is a little bit different, but moving forward, I could absolutely see it being something sustainable and something entertaining and something that I'd want to see continue because it's just, it's been nothing but fun for me so far. But I guess I'm just someone who, enjoys watching more basketball games. Like, I'm just never going to have a problem with that. So it's been fun so far. I'm looking to see how the rest of it shakes out, because as we're recording, I think there's another one tonight. The Eastern Conference last playing game is tonight, and then the Western Conference the next night. So I'm looking forward to see how those shake out.
Yeah, same here, man. I've actually been one of those people that critiqued it. Was like, okay, I don't think we need to have this, especially just because I'm thinking from like a future perspective, right? Especially when you talk about the Bulls. Let's just say the Bulls made it to the play-in tournament.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's a justification for them to say, "Oh, we made the playoffs," and it's like, did you really though? You know what I mean? Like, I viewed it as it's just another. It could be another scapegoat per se to say that, oh, we were in the playoff hunt, or we could have, or we pretty much made the playoffs, or because of the fact that we played into it instead of actually winning it outright, like in the old days. You know
Yeah.
what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's
So
an interesting point. What's so funny is that the Bulls can't even say that, and they're still, kind of trying to spin it as if the franchise is moving in a positive direction, which, I think it's moving in a more positive direction than this time last year, but there's no sugarcoating. It's give away 2 first-round picks and not even make the top 10 is a massive disappointment, a failure, all the above. So it even highlights more how much work they have to do that they couldn't even get to the top 10. But I totally see your point on an individual team basis. Like, you don't want, if you're a fan of a team, you don't want your team like pushing all the chips in just to get to the middle, just to get to mediocrity. That's a problem for fans and individual teams. But yeah, I totally see your point there. Just on the league wide basis, I'm sure they see it as a success, just because of the ratings and everything like that.
yeah, most definitely, most definitely. I mean, like I said, you got to give your props to the league, and especially how this year played out. I think having the Lakers play the Warriors, especially with the current situation that the teams are in for that play-in, that kind of really boosted what this thing can look like moving forward.
Mhm.
And hey, it benefits the league, and for us basketball watchers, it benefits us. It's more basketball to watch. So I mean, it is what it is. I'm cool with it, I guess. I just hope teams just actually don't use their lives in recruiting, trying to recruit top players to their franchises and say, what we trying to get here. We always played, we were kind of close. But yeah, that's either here or there because now we got to talk about the team that, like you mentioned, does not make the playoffs, right? They had every chance to make the playoffs.
It sounds like you're subtweeting the Bulls a little bit.
One of the few teams. It's one of the few teams that didn't make it. But hey, I mean, this is Chicago, right? This is what we've been accustomed to for years. Oh, we're always going to make the playoffs, or we're right there. And then next thing you know, yeah, we're not there. It's clearly that we're not there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and this year, I mean, to me, it feels like one of the more significant missed opportunities in recent memory, certainly since the start of the rebuild, because you make the move to acquire a second all-star, and you give up 2 first-round picks in the process that, like, they might retain that pick this year, but even if they do, there's just so many holes to plug on this team at the point guard position, on the wing. There's just a lot of questions to me for them to have made that move and not even make the top 10. So yeah, it puts them in a really tough spot. I mean, if you're looking for bright sides to it, I would say that the new front office seems to at least have, I think it's safe to say that the culture of the organization is in a better place than it was a year ago. Like, people seem to be buying into the win first, win now mentality. Now, the problem with that, for me at least, is if that's going to be the undercurrent to everything you do, the results have to follow, or else, you don't get that long of a leash in this league for, talking about, we're all about winning. And if the results don't follow, you get a season that showed signs of growth early. And, after the trade deadline, there were extenuating circumstances with, the condensed calendar and everything like that. So, they'll get a little leeway, but, they really have to nail this offseason, and they really have to nail the start and the duration of next season and really show that this move is something that's going to vault them into the, top half of the Eastern Conference, or else it's not even just that they're right back where they started. They're even set back further because you gave up the draft capital. So it's high stakes. It's high stakes right now, and the Bulls understand that. But it's the bed that they've made for themselves.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, Arturas Karnisovas, even in the beginning of when he first got here, they made it known they were going to be aggressive. They're going to be the ones that's going to change what this previous regime is known for, which is to be reactive instead of proactive. And they made, and like you mentioned, this past trade deadline, they made that proactive approach and went big to go after Nikola Vucevic to bring that second all-star to play with Zach LaVine. And from a statistical perspective, especially when they both later on have finally got the group to play together, it seems like the pair works. It seems like it thrives, at least. But those, what are the other components that's going to be put with that team to make it be successful? That's going to be the key. We just mentioned point guard position, right? Kobe White is not doesn't obviously appear to be the full point guard of the future for this franchise, nor is it the skill set, nor does it provide the actual skill set for Billy Donovan's offensive system. There's many rumors that have been sparked regarding Lonzo Ball, and it seems like Lonzo Ball's been on the Bulls' radar for the past 2 years. Considering the previous regime thought about trading for him before even drafting Kobe White. Is that an ideal situation for the Bulls, really considering, especially from a cap space perspective, Vucevic ate up so much more of that salary cap than what we originally thought we would have come into this offseason if we didn't make that type of trade?
Yeah, well, it's tough, and they're going to have a decision to make, not just on what positions they try to address, but also what they operate from a cap space perspective. Because you could, there is a route for them to clear out, the mid $20 million, like $24-25 million in room that they would need to chase a guy like Lonzo Ball. But it's tough because they're a little bit restricted. Once you get there, you're going to have. I did the math, and this is something that people can read in more detail at NBCSportsChicago.com if they're interested, because it's very complicated to explain all the machinations off the top of my head. But they would have about 6 players on the roster if they did everything that they needed to do to get to that $24-25 million a year number. And you'd have to renounce your match rights on Lauri Markkanen, which is letting, as much as he disappointed this season, it's letting a 23-year-old asset, for lack of a better word, walk for nothing. Whereas they could, if they keep his rights and don't renounce them, it's going to cost them a large chunk of their cap space or potential cap space. But you open up sign and trade possibilities. You open up the possibility of matching and maybe trading him later. So it's very complicated. The point I'm trying to make, though, is even if you do get to that $24-25 million a year number, you're a little bit limited there, and you're not going to be able to necessarily get it in a bidding war with a team like, say, the Knicks, who are rumored to be interested in Lonzo Ball too. And we know that the Knicks have deep pockets. Like, if they want somebody, they're gonna be aggressive too in going to get them. I think Lonzo on the court would be a pretty good fit alongside Zach LaVine, because he's long, he's a reputation as a positive team defender, defensive playmaker. Gets steals, rebounds well for his position. Obviously, a terrific player in transition and passing the ball. I mean, I don't know that he's like your traditional slow it down in the half court kind of like pick and roll aficionado point guard. But he would do a lot in terms of connecting and playmaking on the break for this team. His 3-point shot and free throw percentage have both improved so markedly over the last 2 seasons that I actually kind of believe that he is a much better shooter than he was earlier in his career, which this new regime values and you should value, next to Zach LaVine. So I get where the Lonzo interest is coming from. I think actually working around to get the cap space to chase him is a little bit more complicated than it seems on the surface. So I'll be interested to see if they go through the process of doing that and potentially, sacrifice a lot of their depth and cap space for next offseason. That'd be another factor. So it's complicated. I do like the Lonzo fit, though. The ideal scenario would have been what they reportedly discussed at the deadline, which was, a trade of Lauri Markkanen for Lonzo Ball, or maybe even a sign and trade. Now, obviously, at this point, I would think the Bulls would have to, chip in a fair amount in terms of extra assets on top of that, just because of how much Markkanen's value has diminished over the second half of the season. But, that to me would be the ideal scenario, because you wouldn't have to work as hard from a cap space perspective, and you swap a guy in Markkanen who is talented, but just doesn't fit the roster right now, for a guy that does a little bit better. It's been reported that those talks could be revisited in the summer, but, again, at this point, I just don't know what Lowry's value is. There'll be other teams in the market for Lonzo. So it'll be interesting to see. I mean, there are also other names on the free agent market in terms of point guards. Spencer Dinwiddie has a player option that he could decline. People have forgotten about him a little bit because he's been out most of the season with that torn ACL. You got a guy like Devontae Graham who's restricted, but maybe with Charlotte bringing in LaMelo Ball, maybe he's not as much a part of their long-term plans. Dennis Schroeder is a name that's been floating out there. He's interesting, I suppose. There are a lot of ways that they can go here. But again, it's going to be dependent on them actually choosing to clear out the cap space necessary, which will be complicated. So we'll see if they do that. I mean, it really would be a lot of work to make maybe one move when, in my opinion, it's just tough to pick one area of this roster where you think, okay, if we put one person in this position, everything's fixed, because to me, there are, 3 or 4 problem areas that really need addressing from last season. So we'll just have to see how they approach that.
Yeah, most definitely, man. And I mean, in a recent article that you published, you mentioned the guaranteed salaries um, for the Bulls roster for this upcoming season,
Mhm.
and yeah, they eating up a lot of cap space. We talk about Nikola Vucevic having $24 million, Zach LaVine 19.5 mil. Alfred Minu, he signed his play,
Yeah.
who did his player option. He got 10 mil.
Yeah.
And you got obviously the rookies with Kobe White, Patrick Williams at 7 mil. You got Kobe White at 5 mil, and then Troy Brown Jr., who I really do like and think will be a good fit for this Bulls roster,
Mhm.
at 5 mil. So, but you also have Thaddeus Young, who's partially guaranteed.
Yeah.
You have Tom Satoransky, who is partially guaranteed,
Yeah.
and those players, from other reports, have been reported that it seems like they want them, that the Bulls want them back, and especially Thad Young.
Mhm.
However, to fulfill what they want to fulfill, that may not be a valuable option. Do you really, in your opinion, do you think Thad Young, especially the way that he played this season under Billy Donovan's staff, is such an ideal or such a big piece for this Bulls roster moving forward that you can't necessarily just let him go? You got to find a way to make it work.
Yeah, I mean, I think Thad would be so difficult to replace if they did let him go. I mean, that's why they didn't trade him at the deadline, right? And they could have netted a really, really handsome return at the deadline for Thad. So, they kept him around for a reason. They kept him around because he was impacting winning. I think before Vooch got here, second only to Zach LaVine on the roster. Obviously, he has a long-standing relationship with Zach. He's really integral to the locker room, especially to Patrick Williams, mentoring him. So, and there's just a lot of things tangible and intangible that Thad provides that I think would be really difficult to replace. And that's the opportunity cost that you're looking at to generate this type of cap space. Like that number that I mentioned earlier, around $24 million, like that they could get to. Not only are you renouncing your match rights on Lauri Markkanen, so you lose a little leverage there, you'd also have to waive, Thad Young and Tomas Satoransky. Now, again, anybody could have varying opinions on those players, but they were guys that played big minutes and were big contributors to this team last year and weren't negative contributors. I mean, Thad was overwhelmingly positive. Sato, to me, is a really solid backup lead guard. I got no qualms with Satoransky's game at all. Not only those, you're going to have to renounce your ability to go over the cap to re-sign a guy like Garrett Temple, another dude who, a little bit more limited in terms of his on-court impact than Thad, but by all accounts, just an absolutely essential veteran presence in that locker room. Like it's difficult. I mean, maybe these are sacrifices that they're willing to make because they are going to need to be aggressive to add, more top tier talent to the roster. And maybe that's worth sacrificing a little bit of depth. And, maybe they can even work the margins with exceptions or with, the veteran minimum and try to fill out the bench that way. So again, I truthfully can sit here and say that I don't know which direction they're going to go, because I think chasing the cap space option and trying to get, a really reputable or viable third banana alongside Zach and Vooch, I think that, would be a reasonable way to attack the offseason, because that you need immediate results next season. I also think it would be a viable option to operate over the cap potentially, see what you can find for Lowry on the sign and trade market potentially, and use your mid-level exception, which you can only use if you're over the cap, for $9 or $10 million starting salary, and try to find like a really, really quality rotation player that way, and see if you can hodgepodge it together, and then bank on significant development for Patrick Williams over the offseason and hope that he grows into something. He showed promise this year, but hope that he really grows into something next year that you can bank on a night-to-night basis, and kind of internally improve that way. So their history says that we won't know what they're going to do until they do it, because this front office has played everything very close to the vest, and there are so many options on the table. But I see the argument for either direction. The one thing I know for sure, though, is if you do let a guy like Thad Young walk, he's just going to be so difficult to replace him. And even, I mean, you talk about the veterans that you wouldn't be able to bring back in the scenario where you chase significant cap spaces. Daniel Tice, another guy who at that forward center spot was super impactful. And obviously, you could roll your eyes and say, well, all these guys, they were contributors on the team, right? But the team wasn't very good. But you still do need those guys outside of, your star level talent. You still need those really solid veteran, depth contributors, to be the team that you want to be. So I'll just be curious to see how they walk that balance, because it's not going to be an easy one, by any means. And again, can't stress enough, they really, really, really need to nail it this offseason for the future of the franchise.
everybody listening right now, you're listening to NBC Sports Chicago Bulls writer Rob Schaefer. You mentioned Daniel Theus, man. I love Daniel Theus and what he brought to the Bulls, not just because of his ability, even though he's not consistent with it, and an ability to stretch the floor and shoot the three when necessary, but his toughness. Like they lacked that toughness in the paint, and pretty much that that really dog mentality to help bolster that rebounding problem that they did have throughout the season, especially since they had to trade away Daniel Gafford, who was good for that to the Wizards. And I just wonder where you're gonna get someone like that especially in the market, because the Bulls are not a tough team per se. They can be when they want to, but that's not in their DNA. So how do you get that? And Arturas Karnisovas even said, like, they want that versatility, they want that toughness on the Bulls roster. So is there a potential option where if they don't bring Daniel Theus back, they let Thad Young go, the players that were tough and fulfilled those roles? Can you get that through the draft? Can you? Especially if you like maybe a second round, you got a second round pick, and I believe they still have their first round pick for this upcoming draft.
Well, they only have their first round pick this year if it jumps into the top 4 at the
right.
So obviously, it would be much easier to fill that gap if you do have that top 4 pick. They're I believe tied for 8th in the lottery odds right now, which gives them about a 20% chance of keeping their pick this year, which isn't nothing, but it's also an 80% chance of not keeping it. So that's tough. I mean, this in the second round, I mean, AK came in with a reputation as drafting well deep into the draft. Obviously, he's widely credited with the Nikola Jokic find when he was in Denver. That's a second round pick. Monty Morris is a guy that Denver drafted in the second round that's been a contributor for them while AK was there. So, he has a reputation of being able to find guys in that range, but in terms of finding a contributor next year and someone that's going to bring that, veteran physicality, toughness, I think that'd be a big stretch in the draft, unless, of course, they jump into the top 4, which we'll see. On the free agent market, I'm not sure. I mean, that's where you would have to work the margins of like the vet minimum guys and just try to fill, when you do have your key pieces installed, try to fill the gaps that you that you can identify as still needing to be addressed. So, I mean, I guess that's how I would do it. Tice, though, I mean, it's no secret what they did at the deadline. Like they clearly saw a team that was not, whether it be mature enough, physical enough, tough enough. They took a team that they assessed to be lacking in that department, and they addressed it by bringing in a guy like Tice, obviously bringing in a guy like Vucevic. It completely changed the way they played. They played a lot more out of the post. They play a lot more kind of smash mouth, mash mismatches type of basketball down the stretch of the season. It had its moments of working, and it's had its moments of not working so well. And obviously, availability, guys getting injured, Zach getting COVID, it all affects it. But to me, you look at a guy like Tice, you look at a guy like Thad, I see them both as being, good veteran presences and tough physical presences. I'm not sure you can have both of them on the team just the way that the roster is balanced. I see too much need for a point guard, and I see too much need for kind of a viable two-way wing option, like maybe a guy like a Garrett Temple, or a guy that can play the 2 or the 3, but maybe has a little bit more upside, or maybe has a little bit more consistency in terms of shooting or on the offensive end. So I think they got to balance this roster right now. They just are a little bit too front court heavy for I think to get where they want to go. So to me, the cap thing is going to be interesting because you might have to part with all of these guys if they don't decide to chase the most amount of cap space that they possibly could. Maybe you only have to part with 1 or 2. But when you look at the trio of Thad, Lowry, and Tice, I really don't see a scenario where more than 1, maybe 2 of those guys is back next season. As much as their presence was at times felt on this team, you just have to balance the roster better next season. So. I'll be interested to see what they do with Tice, because I know AK likes. I mean, he said at his end of season presser that he really liked what he brought to the team. He's looking forward to talking with him in free agency coming up. But I just don't know if it's prudent to bring all of those front court pieces back again. I think you got to address the perimeter a little bit more on this team to take another step forward.
Well, perimeter wise, we do know what we currently do have, which is you got Zach LaVine, you have Kobe White, and you have Patrick Williams. Now, in the presser that you mentioned, Zach LaVine did send an invitation to Kobe White and Patrick Williams to come work out with him out west.
Mhm.
And Patrick Williams is playing in this year's summer league, which was just announced for August. And I believe Patrick Williams said in his presser as well that he will be participating in those things. Um, do you really believe that Patrick Williams and Kobe White training with Zach LaVine, especially considering how Zach LaVine, especially since he's been to Chicago and been healthy, has emerged so quickly into being the go-to guy for this team, and not just being that for the team, but an overall all-star throughout the league, where his numbers have improved drastically and efficiently each season, pretty much since he's been in Chicago. Do you believe that type of development with Kobe White and Patrick Williams can really accelerate that process by working out with Zach LaVine this coming off season in preparation for next year?
Yeah, I love to hear that Zach had already extended that invitation to those two guys because, we talked about how Kobe White might not necessarily fit the traditional point guard mold. I still think he's a good young player that showed a lot of growth in the last 18 games of this season, and that can be a viable, piece moving forward. Patrick, obviously they're relying on Patrick Williams massively over the course of this offseason to develop and, without 2 of your next 4 first-round picks, develop into a guy that can be a third star, a third option alongside Zach LaVine and Nikola Vucevic. They're obviously banking hard on that. So I love it not only from the perspective of them going and getting to work with a guy like Zach, who has, since he tore his ACL at age 21, unfortunately gotten better basically every season that he's been in the league and ascended to a completely different level this year. How could you not love your second year player and your rookie, who have both shown promise in their own ways, going to work with a guy like that? I think that's great. And I love what it says about Zach LaVine, who is really not only, has he improved on the court over the last few seasons, and, the ways that he has are very easily identifiable this year. Had one of the most prolific shooting seasons efficiency wise, in NBA history. Hitting 42% of his threes on 8 attempts a game is crazy. Pull up from anywhere. I shot 48% on catch and shoots. One of the more surefire finishing guards in the NBA. He took the most field goal attempts at the rim for a guard in the NBA this season and was shooting 66% on those shots. So, he's just totally taken all of his physical tools and maximized them in a scoring capacity and got better as a defender and playmaker too, and passer. So those things are great, but a key part of Zach's development this year to me was him talking about wanting to be more of a leader in the locker room, wanting to be more of a vocal presence with the young guys, because as crazy as it seems, he is a vet at this point at 26 years old. He'll turn 27 in the middle of next season. So I love what it says about Zach. I love what it says about the way that he views the young guys, the essential young guys on the team, and Kobe and Pat, especially, as guys that he can't take under his wing and show the ropes a little bit, because as much as people can poke holes in Zach's resume in terms of has he won in the league yet, obviously he still has yet to accomplish that. He certainly knows how to develop every aspect of his game and get better year over year, and that's what the Bulls need from Kobe White and Patrick Williams. So I'll be looking closely to see if any images or videos from that leak onto social media or something like that. That'll be fun to see. And it's just good. I mean, there's another indicator, like I said earlier, as much as the results are, a failure for the season relative to the expectations that were set up to the trade deadline. I just think that's another marker of the culture of the team improving too. Billy Donovan talks about it all the time that, no matter what on-court things go on, he was really pleased with the character and the connectedness of the guys in the locker room. Obviously, the front office has really intentionally tried to instill that kind of the familial kind of player-first environment. Again, it's not perfect. You had player development successes and failures this year. You obviously didn't win as many games as you wanted to, but to me, that's just another marker of the culture getting a little bit better. Zach LaVine growing personally and as a player, and hopefully, what it signals for Bulls fans is Kobe White and Patrick Williams growing as people and players too.
Yeah, I hope that is the case, because we at this point, the Bulls, it's been a long time since the Bulls actually had an all-star on their team for a nice duration. When you talk about Derrick Rose and Jimmy Butler as of late, and seeing what they're doing with their careers now, Zach LaVine has the potential of really being that long-term option for the Bulls, especially the foundational piece of the Bulls. And his contract is due for an extension. He's eligible for a max extension this offseason, or he could wait it out, play another year, and then next he hits the offseason market in free agency. there's been recent talks about maybe he'll take a pay cut. He'll at least consider it maybe. And he also in the presser came out and said, I want what I deserve. And at this point, I think he pretty much made it known, like around the league, he's worth that max contract. And I'm pretty sure I won't be surprised if he is seeking that max contract. Do you think the Bulls are going to take that leap and pretty much sign him now to a max extension, or try to convince him to, take a little bit less, considering the salary cap situation being so tight this off season? Still sign a max, not necessarily a max, but a good enough deal where he still gets at least close to what he's worth, but not the full potential of what that deal could be worth.
Yeah. So the complicated thing about Zach and the extension is it is possible for the Bulls to sign him to his max contract this offseason, but to do it, and this was first written about publicly by Bleacher Report, Eric Pincus over there, who's great at just a total salary cap whiz. He does great work. The way that the Bulls can extend Zach, and it wouldn't even be an extension, it would actually be a renegotiation. So they would substitute the final year of his contract at $19.5 million, as you said earlier, with his 30% max, just 30% of the salary cap. It's $34 million in that neighborhood. But the only way they can do that is by generating about $14 million in cap space and then using that cap space to substitute Zach's contract out for what the max would be, obviously. So that calculation and the reason is to extend his current contract. The CBA only allows for a guy of Zach's years of service, and he hasn't met any All-NBA requirements or anything like that to this point in his career. So the most that the Bulls could actually extend his current contract without renegotiating the whole thing would be for 120% of his previous salary, which only levels out to around $23 million. So that's a possibility from the Bulls' perspective. If I'm Zach LaVine, I'm scoffing at that, because I, just look at the market for, a top 7 scorer in the league at age 26 who's doing it as efficiently as he is. It's more than $23 million. Even though that contract would go up by 8% every season, that's just below his market value, just plain and simple. So I don't see any scenario where the Bulls extend him for that at that number this offseason. The question is, are they going to, as we were talking about earlier, how difficult it would be for them to carve out cap space? Will they do that and then use that cap space not to add to the team right now, but to invest in Zach LaVine and kind of commit to building around him moving forward? I don't know. It's an option on the table. We'll see. They could also choose to prioritize making moves around Zach to make the team better around him, and in turn make it a more desirable destination for him long term. The thing about Zach is he has not indicated in any way publicly or to my knowledge privately that he doesn't want to be in Chicago. Like he said at every turn, I love being here. I want to win here. Nikola Vucevic said that's one of the things that stood out to him most about Zach, is that he wants to win in Chicago. Zach said at his presser that he's looking forward to working with Billy Donovan for years to come. Notable. Think of how many coaches Zach has had in his NBA career. Billy seems like the safest bet to be around over the course of a few seasons, which I think could do a lot for Zach personally and obviously professionally in his development. So the conundrum is, you're not going to sign him to that. The only extension that they're eligible to sign him for is for that $23 million, just because of the CBA. You're not going to sign him for that this offseason because it's below his market value. Unless they clear out the cap space and do the max option that way, the only way to give him his max is to let his current contract expire next offseason, let him go to unrestricted free agency, and then sign him back for his max. Again, there's no indication that Zach doesn't want to be in Chicago or that would test the waters. A lot can happen in a season, obviously. And I just personally, if I'm, the Bulls front office and I just made this win now move at the deadline to build around Zach, I would feel a little queasy about letting my, star player, my best player, go to unrestricted free agency, even if you're confident right now that he wants to be around long term. It's a very interesting conundrum for the Bulls, and I don't know. I took Zach's comments at his end of season presser to mean that he is looking for the maximum of what he deserves and what he feels he's worth, and I think he's earned that at this point, because that $19.5 million salary number that he's making right now is just it is not nearly commensurate with his production or the efficiency on which he's doing it. So. And, for that matter, now this is a previous front office regime, so these feelings don't carry over, but necessarily, on a personal level. But Zach did, if you remember, when he signed this original contract, he didn't sign it with the Bulls. Like, he signed an offer sheet with the Sacramento Kings, and then the Bulls, after deliberating about it, had to go in and match it. And now it's become one of the more, below market value contracts in the league. So this is all stuff that I'm sure Zach is aware of, and that factors into his decision making on what he ultimately wants financially. So it's really kind of, to me, the ball is kind of in the Bulls' court if they want to do the generate the cap space and then use that to max them out now, or if they want to say, hey, Zach, look, we would rather focus our full attention on improving the team right now, and then we'll come back and readdress you next offseason. I think that's a totally viable option too, and I don't think that would be like offensive in any way. But it's just, a decision that they're going to have to make. And again, like, it adds to the stakes of this offseason because you've added the guy in Vucevic and you've used so much draft capital to do it that now, if you're not fully committing to Zach LaVine, it's kind of like, what are you doing? Because that is what you signaled when you made that move originally. So I'll be interested to see what they do. I'll be interested to see how Zach, plays next season. It wouldn't surprise me if he took his game to another level or was close to the level that he was at this year. And then, whether that extension or that renegotiation, I should say, happens this offseason or whether it goes to unrestricted free agency next offseason, the Bulls try to address it then. It's going to be, almost the single biggest storyline as it pertains to the next couple seasons of this franchise because of all the resources they've invested to build around him recently.
Another potential headline that has floated around is the idea of a reunion between Bradley Beal and Billy Donovan. Bradley Beal is going to be pretty much I believe, an unrestricted free agent after next season, and the idea of Billy Donovan and the Bulls franchise, even though they want Zach, they pretty much made it known that they want to keep Zach. You don't know what's going to happen with that situation, like you just mentioned, especially since Zach LaVine's going to want his max contract and how that compares to the Bulls salary cap. So the idea of maybe bringing back Bradley Beal, or maybe bringing Bradley Beal to Chicago to reunite with his former college coach, or even pair him with a Zach LaVine, bearing how this Vucevic trade pans out and how he does with his tenure in Chicago.
Yeah, I mean,
is that something that we should actually pay attention to?
I mean, it's certainly something to think about, I suppose, because executive, from everyone from Arturis to players on the team have talked about the winning mentality that the Bulls are operating with, and the kind of, let's prioritize winning at every turn. Again, even if the results haven't yielded that yet, that's where their focus is. Everyone has talked about that making the organization more desirable to potential free agents moving forward, and that being part of the impetus behind it. That's certainly noble. To me, before I'm like jumping the horse on all that stuff, I would want to see that, desirability actually translate to wins next season, because that's how you attract a guy like that. Again, a lot can happen in the season as it relates to anybody's free agency, Zach LaVine, Bradley Beal, whoever. I do know that everything that was reported around Bradley Beal when he was, potentially going to be on the trade market this season was that he was fully committed to the Wizards, and, similar to Zach, like, kind of wanted to win there, wanted to stick it out. Obviously, things looked gnarly for them at the beginning of the season, but then they completely turned it around. Him and Russ look like a pretty dynamic pairing. The first playing game against Boston didn't go particularly well, but Brad is struggling with an injury, it seems like. And, they shot 3 of 21 from 3. There's variance there, yada, yada, yada. I'm just not sure that, Bradley Beal is itching to get out of Washington right now. I'm obviously not, embedded in that situation. So I'm talking from purely an outsider's perspective, but that's been my sense of the situation. So, I endorse it as something to track just because of the Billy Donovan connection and how exciting it is to think about, like, those two guys pairing up, or even with Vucevic or anything like that. And Bradley Beal is obviously just phenomenal. Could have been the scoring champ this year. Missed it out by a couple decimal points. So to me, maybe I'm just too focused on like what is ahead this offseason, but to me, they've still got work to do in terms of making themselves that desirable, or even in a position to like swing a trade or anything like that. They still have work to do in that respect before I think we can set our eyes there all the way.
Yeah, it's a lot. Like you said, it's going to be an interesting off season. So we got to see what the Bulls are going to do to help this franchise continue to turn things in the right direction moving forward. That being said, Rob, what do you got coming up? Obviously, I know you're not going to be on a complete hiatus. With the off season and everything taking place, there's no Bulls basketball right now. So, what do you plan to do with your time in your so-called off season before the Bulls, start to make noise with the potential draft stuff and free agency in this off season?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So, like I said, the work's just getting started for the Bulls. And I feel the same way about us. We'll be breaking everything down possible. I mean, we've got a lot of time to kill here, obviously, but the playoffs still have to get underway, and then you'll have the draft, free agency. Obviously, if the Bulls keep their pick, we'll be blowing out draft coverage because not only will they be making a pick in the first round, which isn't guaranteed right now, they'll be making a top 4 pick. And in this draft specifically, I mean, that could really be franchise changing. Could leave you in a much better position. So certainly that. I mean, free agency wise, what isn't there to break down at this point? So, the themes that we've hit on in this podcast, the Zach extension possibility, the possibility of clearing out cap space and who should the Bulls chase, the possibility of if the Bulls don't clear out cap space, who could they acquire on the trade market that way? Over the next coming weeks, I've got, I'm looking at my whiteboard right now. We've got all kinds of possibilities in terms of that. So we'll be addressing all that. What does the point guard market look like? Because again, that's been identified not only by just people watching, but it seems like the Bulls, because it's been reported for so long, that's been an interest point. So we'll be breaking down everything in that respect. We'll be bringing that stuff related to the team. Obviously, there's a lot of storylines internally. Patrick Williams' development, how's that coming along? Kobe White, is his last 18 game stretch of the season, is that real? Is that sustainable? Is that more meaningful than his hot stretch at the end of last season? Spoiler alert, I kind of think so. But where does he fit into the long-term plans? Lauri Markkanen's free agency is going to be something to track, even if I'd be surprised if Lauri's back next season. You can never say never, though, if they want to match and retain the asset or something along those lines. But I mean, there's really endless storylines to track this offseason. We're going to be diving into myself and Casey, my colleague Casey Johnson over at NBCSportsChicago.com. We'll be diving into all that stuff. It's a lot. You can tell I'm scatterbrained because there's so many possibilities in front of us. But if I could just plug Twitter. I'm on Twitter at Rob_Schaefer. I'm tweeting, putting out stuff. Pretty much on a daily basis. So that's what the offseason is gonna look like for us. I'm sure that's what it'll look like for Bulls fans too, because it is such a crucial juncture for this team. They got to say it last season that this season was an evaluation year. Now it's time to really, kick it into high gear, because they've made themselves, they've transformed this into a situation where if they can't right the ship soon, things could get a little bit uglier. But for now, the direction of the franchise, again, if we put it in the perspective of better than it was last year, and we'll see what the front office does from here. It should be an interesting offseason.
Yeah, I agree, man. I agree. And I hope all the Bulls fans will continue to follow your work at NBC Sports Chicago. Y'all doing a lot of great stuff, especially with the Bulls Talk podcast, man. My shout out to my guy, Tony Gill, who helps run the ship over there with that. You guys are doing, a lot of great work with, Jason Goff and Casey Johnson and those guys. I tune in to it, listen to it to get insight from all of you. So, continue to do good work with those things. Bulls fans continue to follow Rob Schaefer, like you mentioned, on Twitter, which if I pull up right now, it is Rob_Schaefer. And follow his work. He be writing some good, interesting, in-depth analysis for you Bulls fans to see what options as far as what your favorite team can do for you in the Windy City. And continue to follow his work, like I previously said, to get the best of the best analysis out there. And follow me on Twitter and Instagram as well at Josh M Hicks Media for all your latest work on RealRegalRadio.com, and follow War Media on YouTube, all Google podcast platforms, War on Anchor, Instagram and Twitter, War Media, you name it. We're all over the place. So we got a lot of great stuff coming for you. Even though the Bulls are not in the playoffs, we still got some great stuff coming your way. Rob, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I really appreciate it. And I hope you continue to enjoy your off season now that it's real fresh right now. So again, love to have you come back anytime. And I look forward to seeing what you got to put out and what the Bulls are going to do moving forward.
All right. Thank you, man. Thanks for having me, Josh. It's always an honor. It's always fun to come on and chop it up. So I appreciate it.
No problem, man. You seem to have a good rest of your off season.